So today, I'm glad you're here. My name's Joel. I'm the Music and Worship Associate at Alleluia Baptist Church in Houston, Texas. And I lead the contemporary services there. Before that, I was a music and worship arts pastor at Cedar Heights Baptist Church in North Little Rock, Arkansas. In that setting, I was what you would traditionally call the minister of music, so I was in charge of the whole program. Contemporary and traditional services I led every week, and adult choir, youth choir, everything. Now, I just do contemporary services as my role, plus I direct our middle school choir, and then I'm just involved in the music ministry overall. Tallowood has a pretty big music ministry, and we just got back from a adult choir and orchestra trip overseas that I went on, so I try to stay involved in every aspect that I can in our worship ministry so that I don't get siloed into just playing my guitar with our drummer and bass player. And so, but I am here to talk about transitioning into a new model for worship. And so what I'd like to do real fast is just to get an idea of I've already talked to you some, Nancy, and kind of know where you're coming from, but if you would tell me what your role is at your church, and maybe why you don't have to tell me every reason why, but what about your church situation makes you want to take this course this morning? So
there's a lot of tension in this older church in general, but we have a pretty age span. And we have a contemporary service which is totally apart from the two traditional services. And the tension is that there's a big divide developing. It's become like two separate churches occupying the same space. Now, their services not in the sanctuary, as is the case I suspect most time. Got into a discussion last night with this lady I just happened to meet. And I'm just a lay person in the choir.
Okay.
Two music directors from 1,500 miles apart, and they were talking about that tension that develops, and it's like they're reading each other's mail. And I thought, if we run across two people just coincidentally, that must be a much bigger issue, and there must be a lot of people involved in this. And so I decided maybe I would come to this morning, so where else I plan.
Yeah, it is. If you talk to people, I've run the same thing. You talk to people from two completely different churches, they're probably experiencing the same kinds of things. If it's an established church that's been around for 50, 70 years, and then all of a sudden, a pastor comes and they want to start doing new things and trying new things, so you instantly create all kinds of tensions. We're not here to talk about the whys of doing that. I don't want to talk philosophy of why should we transition into modern worship. I'm just going to assume that you're in that situation, and we're just going to talk about nuts and bolts of it. If your leadership's decided this is what we're going to do, then we're going to try to discuss some ways to make it work in a way that creates unity instead of division, okay? And so here we go. We're going to talk about how to prepare, equip, and lead a church into the beginning stages of transitioning to a new worship model. And so we're going to talk about roles of pastor, volunteers, technology, the worship leader, and I think maybe most importantly, selecting contemporary music for congregational singing that's appropriate for your church. And so, just to get going here, we have 4 questions that need answering. Well, I didn't really let Aaron and Sarah talk. What about you guys? What are you? I know Aaron, but everyone else might not know Aaron.
I know Aaron.
You joining us?
No, I'm helping, we got an overflow.
Oh, good.
Yes, I'm actually a student here at Baylor, and I'm actually interning at Talwood this summer, so that's how I know Joel. So, yeah, and just kind of getting exposed to all sorts of music. You know, at Talwood they do lots of traditional and contemporary, and there's a good balance there. So,
Okay. All right. What about you?
I just recently graduated with my master's in vocal performance, so my ultimate goal is to teach at a university, but I've been serving as the music director at First United Methodist Church in McGregor for the last about year and a half, and it's an older congregation, but my husband is the youth director and has really helped build the youth, so we kind of have this really wide generational gap, and we're trying to fill in with families and stuff, so we have youth, and we have a lot of senior adults, and so we include hymns and contemporary songs in the worship, but it's trying to find this balance of including everyone in worship, because it tends to be youth singing with contemporary songs, and I get a few glares and people trying to sing with contemporary songs, and then the youth trying to flip through the hymnal, so it's trying to bridge this gap and really involve everybody in worship and expose them to different types of worship, but also blended. It's a really, it's a challenge, and just getting new ideas and things for how to make that work.
Right. It's a delicate balance.
Yes.
If we look at heaven worship, though, in Scripture, it's definitely multi-generational, right? So I feel like if even though it is hard, it's really hard to do that, to strike that balance of multi-generational worship. It's definitely biblical to do it, and so we should try to do it, and I don't think we should give up. Okay? Yes,
The
ma'am.
word came to me on Tuesday of the generations honoring each other.
Okay, yeah. That's a good word.
I really felt that that's what was happening, and that's what I'd like to see happening in a church where I went.
I like that a lot. The generations honoring each other, and why not? We should. And so, okay. Well, let's see what we can talk about this morning. We got these 4 questions I think we need to ask. The first is, what is a vision? You don't need to move into a transition without a clear vision for where you want to take the congregation. You wouldn't drive a car without defogging your windshield, and it's just the same, you wouldn't want to lead a congregation somewhere where you really don't have a clue where you want to end up. And you don't want to do that by yourself. You want to do that with your church leadership, but you need to have vision for where you want to go. You need to have a good motive. What is your motive? The integrity of our motives will determine the integrity of our outcome. And so if we want authentic and faithful worship in the end, then our motive needs to be authentic and faithful to who God is and what God wants from us. Another question we have to ask is, where does the pastor fit in to this? And if the pastor, hey man, how you doing?
Hey.
Grab one of those handouts there. If the pastor is not leading a transition, or at the very least supporting it, all caps, it will fail. Okay? You do not want to go to battle with your pastor. I don't care how cool or how well liked you are in your church. If you're a music minister and he's the pastor, he'll win the battle. Right? There ought not be a battle, but if for some reason you wanted to pick a fight, don't do it.
Do you want to amend that to read the senior pastor?
Well, yeah, senior pastor is what I mean. That's what I'm talking about. The senior pastor, for sure. Because I know we are all pastors, right? When we're on staff and we're called to serve our churches, we do fill pastoral roles. But I definitely mean the senior pastor in this scenario. And then the 4th question we want to answer this morning is, what steps will you take? And this is where the rubber really meets the road. Not every situation is the same, and steps need to be prayerfully considered and determined that are specific to your congregation. And you got to remember that what worked for Church A down the street might not work for Church B where you serve. Every church is different. Even within denominations, every church is different. But just think about how many denominations we have, even maybe represented in this room. Every church is different. And so just because it works at church so-and-so doesn't mean it'll work at your church. You need to know your congregation and what will work for you. All right, so let's talk about vision. Scripture tells us that where there is no revelation, people cast off restraint, but blessed is the one who heeds wisdom's instructions. That's from Proverbs 29:18. You probably recognize this more as where there is no vision, the people perish. And that's a strong word, and we don't want our people perishing in chaos. It's kind of how I take this. If we're casting off restraint and we're just doing whatever we want, we're just trying this, trying that, going with the wind, we're going to create a lot of chaos, and our congregation is going to suffer from that. And so that's the importance of vision, is it kind of brings some clarity, not just to us as staff members, but also to our congregations as to where we're going. And I think this is very true. Changing worship styles will not heal unhealthy churches. Pastors and worship pastors have to minister to their congregations. We have to minister to our congregations and teach them what true worship is. Authentic and faithful Christian worship is not contingent upon the right worship model. Okay? It's contingent upon our faithfulness and our heart's response to God and our congregation's response. So when we talked about this yesterday, a question came up. So how do you educate your church? How do you do that? And my answer was, I think that we as worship leaders have a responsibility and also a great opportunity to educate our church, not by long, hour-long sessions where we talk and our congregation listens, but by the songs we choose and our brief little words that we say between songs. Even just one word before a certain song can get our congregation to think a specific way as they sing the next song. And so we need to be very deliberate and well, deliberate's a good word, about the things we say between songs. And also, we can work together with our pastors to do sermon series on worship. Your pastor teaching about worship can be a powerful thing for your church. And so you and your pastor work together to plan a time when we do a series on worship, a month-long series, and then you can really do a lot of good like that, and your pastor can play a huge role in that. Another way to talk about vision, I got this from worshipleader.com. It's a pretty good resource. I don't subscribe to Worship Leader magazine, but every now and then I'll go to the website and just check out what's going on. Like if I have a specific need, there's usually an article that can be helpful. It's a pretty diverse group. Is not tied to any denomination, and which is helpful, I think. And so this was a pretty good article I found about discovering God's direction for your ministry. And you have it all in your handout there. I didn't write this. I'm going to skip down to number 3 because you can read the rest of it. But I think that step 3 in this, where it says ask questions about yourself, your ministry, co-laborers, and your congregation, I think it gives us some really good questions that we need to ask about ourselves, our congregation, the worship in our church, and then even beyond just the music in our church, the music we use. And one question is, how do we express our heart of worship? What are our priorities and vision? What values are important to us in planning a worship service? What strengths do we have musically and what weaknesses? Are various groups well represented? That's a great question. And we're talking about genders, ages, ethnicities, and even preferences. And I'm not really too concerned about people's preferences in worship, and I don't think you should be either. I think you should be concerned about God's preferences in worship. But if you have a large group of people in your church that are not connecting to the music you're using, well, there may be an issue there. You want to give people something that they can respond to. And so this is a great question. And now this is also talking about who's on stage. If all you have is men on stage all the time, I don't think that sends a great message to the women in our congregation. I think, and if you have a pretty ethnically diverse congregation, but all you have is Caucasians on the stage, I think that sends a bad message too. And so you need to think about who your congregation is. And is your stage, is your worship leadership, is it a microcosm of your congregation, or have you selected a specific group out of your congregation that's going to be on stage and leading them? These are good things to think about and ask yourself. What previous experiences and current expectations inform our perspective on worship and church life? This is a great question because these days people, think about, well, maybe not even these days, maybe for all time and eternity, a Catholic marries a Baptist and they end up in your Baptist church. Well, how is what you're doing in worship connecting to this person that grew up in the Catholic Church? That's one scenario. Or a couple moves down from the north and they always went to a Lutheran church. They haven't found a Lutheran church in Houston that they really connected to, so they ended up at your Methodist denomination church, right? Well, how are you connecting to them? Are you doing worship that's connecting to a broad scope of Christians, or are you doing something that's very specific to people who grew up in your town? People move a lot, and I think people move more and more, and we are relocating a lot. And you probably see that just in the ebb and flow of your congregations in your church. People come and people go because companies move people. So are you doing worship that's connecting to a large picture of Christian life, or are you doing something that's very small and specific? Do we feel comfortable worshiping together? Do visitors feel comfortable with us? Do we connect with each other outside of our weekly services? And do we connect with the world? And what factors contribute to the amount of time we can give to serving? These two questions get us to start thinking about our worship ministry being more than just a music ministry. That our worship ministry is part of discipleship, and our worship ministry is part of mission. And you can't really separate those things. And so these things seem broad, but these things help us do transitions. If we do mission and discipleship well in our worship ministry, then it's easier for us to make change happen in the music. Because if we're connecting people, if we're bringing people in that are being a part of our worship ministry, it's easier to make change. Okay? All right. And then step 4, you answer each of the questions about your worship ministry. You put a K next to it. If you're doing a great job, you don't change it. All right? If it's not broke, don't fix it. If it needs to change, but you can't control it, you pray and you ask God to change it. If it needs to change and you can control it, put a W next to it and you work to change it. And then you visit this list and you keep working on it. All right? And then you thank God for your opportunity in the congregation you're in. All right, so that's vision. Any other thoughts on vision? Any wisdom? Anyone would like to share about setting a vision for your church? It's okay if there's not. Kind of blew through that. Let's talk about motive. Let's look at Luke. If you got your Bibles, yeah, I have my Bible in here still. Let's look at Luke chapter 21, verses 1 through 4. Luke 21, verses 1 through 4. It says, "And Jesus looked up and saw the rich dropping their offerings into the temple treasury. He also saw a poor widow dropping in 2 tiny coins. 'I tell you the truth,' he said, 'this poor widow has put in more than all of them, for these people have put in gifts out of their surplus, but she out of her poverty has put in all she had to live on.'" I want you to think about your church and your church's scenario. If you're like most churches, then your church is not a mega church. And if you're like most churches, your worship ministry doesn't have a $150,000 annual budget or more. If you're like most churches, you don't have a wealth of professional musicians just waiting for you to ask them to come up on stage and play with you. But also, if you're like most churches in big cities, a church like that is within a few blocks of your church. Tallowood is where I serve. We're a pretty big church, and we have a lot of resources. But we're within a 6-mile radius of Houston's First Baptist Church and Second Baptist Church. Y'all probably definitely heard of Second Baptist Church. It may be the biggest church in the Southern Baptist Convention, but if not, it's maybe the second. It's insane how big that church is. Houston's First is also a huge church. Our weekly worship attendance, which is the biggest church I've ever gone to, is just a drop in the bucket for one of those 2 churches. But if you walked into our church, you'd probably think, wow, this church is massive. And it is. It's huge. And it's nothing compared to those churches, though. Size, as far as size goes and resources. If I were to sneak down there on a Sunday night or maybe just like take a Sunday morning off and go to one of those 2 churches and try to compare what we do to them, there would be a huge difference. Even though we have a high expectation for good musicianship and professionalism, there's still going to be a difference. We don't have the resources they have, and we don't sing the same songs they sing. We don't have the same people on stage. We don't have the same style even that they have. We definitely don't have the same lights that they have and video projection and all this stuff. But you know, if I try to compare myself to one of those 2 churches, I'm going to stay frustrated, and my motive for doing what I do is going to change. What I want to say is, what those churches are doing have nothing to do with what Tallowood is doing. Our church is so close to those churches that anyone coming to our church could easily go to one of those 2 churches. But they're not. They're coming to our church because they're connecting at our church. And the same is true for you at your church. If people are coming to your church, there's a reason. And you don't need to try to create the church down the street at your church, because they could just go down there. What you need to do is you need to be who you are, and you need your church to be who it is. And your worship needs to reflect who your congregation is. And God has all placed us in these unique situations, and He's called us to serve where we are. And if our motive is to be as cool as that church, then we've got definitely the wrong motive. And y'all know this. Musicians, we just have big egos. Most musicians do. Not every musician has a big ego, but man, I know I do. You know, I want to be the best. I want to be the best that I can, and God is really working on me with that, you know, and has been for 33 years now. So that's been an issue for me. And so I say this, not being perfect, but humility. Everything you do must be filled with it, okay? And if you are expecting a congregation to follow you, you need to remember that people are seldom convinced into change by arrogance, okay? Your best shot at change is to humbly love your congregation into change. So keep your ego in check and know the heart and the voice of your congregation. Have I kind of nailed that one pretty good? Do I need to expound any more? Your church matters. Your church matters. So here are your good motives, good reasons, and I want you guys to add to this list if you can. But here's our list of good reasons. You give more people a voice. This is good motivations for doing a contemporary service or transitioning your traditional service into a more contemporary service. Either way, you're giving more people a voice. You're exploring new ways to worship, and you're involving more skill sets and new skill sets like guitar, keys, and drums. You know, if you think about it, 100 years ago, no one playing a guitar had a voice in a church. And 100 years ago, no one playing a set of drums had any place in church. But now they do. And these are instruments that are accessible. They're instruments that the common man can afford to play. If you think about it, in a lot of scenarios, if you want to play a violin, you have to have the means to do that. It's expensive to learn that. But guitars, they're cheap. Guitar lessons are free online. Just go to YouTube and type in guitar lesson and you can learn to play guitar. Or I can give you a free app called 4 Chords and it'll teach you how to play guitar. I think that that's kind of part of why this has happened. That why when you come to Baylor and you look at the freshman class, walk into the dorms, every other kid's carrying a guitar in probably. That's how it was at my school. Everyone carried a guitar in. Everyone's got one. And not everyone's good at it, but everyone can give it a shot. I've got a friend who I spent the week with on our choir and orchestra trip a couple weeks ago. And he was playing in our orchestra. He plays viola. And he came with us. He's a worship leader at an Episcopal church in LaPorte, a little city just south of Houston. And it's a smaller church. It's not a really big church. And he was talking to me about their worship because I knew that at this conference we're going to have people from every denomination represented. And I just wanted to know some of his thoughts on what we're talking about. And he said, we do a contemporary service once a month. But what we actually call it is the guitar service. And what I do is I just say, if you got a guitar, bring it next Sunday, and I'll give you a chord chart, and you get up on stage, and you can just play with us. Well, guys, that would not work at my church. No way. No way would I ever do that. No way. But it works for him. And he said that people love it, and people respond to it. And they get a chance to share their gifts and use their gifts in that way. So we're giving people a voice. Can y'all think of any other good reasons to make a change to a more modern worship style? A good motive.
One thing we are encountering right now is replenishing volunteers or replenishing church is, we have quite an older group of folks and they're dying pretty quickly. I mean, amazingly fast. I have never done so many funeral services in my life, and the number of younger folks or even just young families with kids is not coming in just as fast,
Mm-hmm.
And so that's one of the main things is replenishing the ranks of the ministry, replenishing the ranks to reach out in mission opportunities and stuff.
Right. Okay.
the word you used about connecting with youth.
Mm-hmm.
Our church obviously is not, the one I mean, where I'm working, we are not connecting with
Okay. So connecting, that's good.
I was going to kind of say the same thing, just kind of bridging those generational gaps and I guess giving people a wider range of ages and people with different talents an opportunity, to serve, yes, in like, a praise team or something, but also worship, in a different way. I don't know.
Right. Okay. Yeah, finding new ways to worship, that's a good one too. And connecting. And then here's some not good motivations. I think there's a difference in growth and what you're talking about, replenishing and connecting. I think that's a good motivation for bringing people in. But if our main motivation is just church growth and just numbers, that's the wrong motivation. That becomes competition. And I think that our motivation for growth has to be the right motivation. So that's why I say just changing worship styles for growth's sake is not a good motivation. Competing with the sister church, not a good motivation. Meeting people's personal preference, perceived needs, not a good motivation. And this is more on an individual level. If you've got a large group of people that are all kind of in the same cultural scenario, and you're trying to force them to change to something they've never done before, well, there may not be any point in doing that. But, you may want to keep them where they are and just encourage them and continue to lead them like you have, because it's connecting with them and meeting their needs. But if you've got a large group that are hungry for something new and something fresh and something different, and you've just got one or two voices saying no, 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 one or two voices may not be the two voices you want to meet their needs. Okay, and we'll talk about that more a little bit later when we talk about criticism. Any other bad motivations? Any thoughts on that? Yes,
I
ma'am.
hate the word targeting.
Okay.
This church that, we're targeting this group of people. And I don't think anything in the Bible or our understanding of Christ that he targeted a group of people.
Right. I agree with you. When we're targeting people makes it feel like we're just marketing.
Yeah, our church targets this group. Yeah.
That's right.
Marketing, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
Or even just because that's what's happening.
Yeah.
It's like, let's just transition to contemporary worship because that's what everybody's doing.
Right.
But if that's not fitting to your congregation,
Mm-hmm.
that might not be the best step at this particular time.
Right, because one role your church might could play, which I'm talking myself out of a job sometimes when I say this sort of thing, but one role your church might play is being the only church that does traditional worship well in town. And I don't know who all will see this video, but sometimes I feel like Tallowood is that church in Houston. I mean, we do traditional worship. Don't show that to other people in Houston at other churches. But but there's a, is that video in actually?
It's actually videoing.
Then I edit it out.
Yeah, okay, edit that out.
Yeah.
Okay.
But we do traditional worship really, really well. And there are other churches that have just completely cut that out of their worship at their churches, which is fine. And that's what they felt led to do. But we see people coming to our church a lot of times because they're having trouble connecting in other places. And there's some scenarios where that's okay. I don't think that's not really healthy for the church as a whole, but sometimes your church may be able to fill that role. And so just be careful. You just got to be careful about why you're doing what you're doing. And so now let's talk about the pastor. My dad's a pastor, so I feel like I know pastors pretty well. I've had the opportunity to serve under 3 pastors, that I've had incredible relationships with. I don't have any horror stories of working with mean-spirited pastors that are against everything the worship leader's trying to do. I've heard those stories. And so I don't know where you are or what your congregation situation is like, but we're going to just talk about going through a transition with your pastor, your senior pastor. The first thing is, do not lead your congregation to a place your pastor is not leading them. And know your pastor's vision and follow his leadership. He is the leader of your church. Whether you like that or not, he is. And he's who the people will follow. And he's who you ought to follow. Because God's put him or her in a unique position. And that's your role, is to follow that. One of your roles. If you don't have a good relationship with your pastor, work hard to improve that relationship. Do not disagree with your pastor publicly. Doesn't mean you can't disagree with them. I disagree with my pastor sometimes, not very often, but it's happened. I used to serve under my dad as my pastor, and I was the minister of music, and I disagreed with him a lot. But never in a committee meeting, never in a deacon's meeting, never in a business meeting would I have ever stood up and disagreed with my dad, even as a pastor. Never would I do that with my current pastor or the first pastor I served under. That's a bad idea. When you're out from behind closed doors, you're on the same team, and you disagree behind closed doors. That doesn't mean you're a pushover or you don't fight for what you believe is right. Just know when to pick your battles. Encourage your pastor to be a visible presence in worship. This is another place where I've been very fortunate. My first pastor I served under stood on the front row with hands in the air through 100% of the song service. Just constant. Just there he was, just right in front of the church the whole time. When I served under my dad as pastor, same thing. He sang in the choir, and he was up in the choir loft every Sunday morning worshiping with hands raised. My current pastor, Dwayne, is the same way. He's not in the choir, but he is a visible presence in worship. He's an active worshiper. He raises his hands. He moves to the music. And pastors need to know, and maybe if your pastor doesn't know this, you can gently remind them that wherever they are in the room, they're leading. When they're in the worship center or auditorium, they instantly become a leader. And people watch them, and they know where they are. And if your pastor likes to study their notes during the song service and sit down and not engage at all, chances are your church is going to pick up on that cue. And so if that's going on, that may be a behind closed door conversation that you have with your pastor. And just gently encourage them to be a more visible presence in worship. And then you want to agree with your pastor on vocabulary for worship. And what I mean is talking about labels we use or how we label a style. If you like the word modern, but your pastor likes the word contemporary, well, just you guys pick one of them and use it. Because if your pastor uses contemporary for what you use the word modern, then you're just going to keep your congregation confused. You know, contemporary music's only been around, what we call contemporary music, it's been around for, 40 years or something like that now. And so it doesn't have the heritage that what we call traditional worship has, which has been around for hundreds of years. And so we don't have clear definitions for everything, and we don't have clear labels and titles for everything. So we could call it a worship band, a praise band, a worship team, or a worship band. Those are just four little things we can call the group that leads worship on Sunday morning. Those are just 4 that come to mind. well, if I'm calling it one thing and the pastor's calling it something different and this is going on, it just frustrates people. And people need to know what to call things. And so just decide with your pastor what you're going to call it. Decide what your title's going to be. People don't like being called minister of music anymore. And what's your personnel committee going to call your position? If you don't want to be the minister of music, you definitely don't want to be the song director or the, that's not really a title you want. So what does this position need to be called? Of course, that's probably your personnel committee's decision to make, but your pastor's definitely going to be involved on that. So if that's going to change, agree with your pastor on it. Okay, so steps to change. Step 1, educate your congregation. I already talked about this. This is a role this is something you and your pastor can do together, okay? Educating your congregation about what worship really is will help resistors and those eager for change to follow in humility. Resistors, are going to be pushing back on what you're doing. And then those that are really eager and ready for the change can have a tendency to be ugly and rude to the resistors. Have y'all ever noticed that? And if you can educate everybody what true worship is, everybody can be nice to everybody and be humble and everybody can give a little bit. Second step, cast your vision to the congregation. You don't want them to feel like they've been hoodwinked, right? We're not trying to trick a congregation into change. We're trying to lead them into change. There's a big difference in trickery and leadership. Introduce new things slowly. And I'm talking about years and not weeks or months. So I keep talking about my dad, but my dad took a smaller church in a suburb. They run about 300 people. He led them through a change from all traditional to a very on the contemporary side of blended in about 15 years. It took 15 years. No splits. No one left the church mad over music that I know of. So it can be done. But if you want to do it in a way that's healthy for your congregation, it takes that amount of time. Sometimes a new pastor or a new regime comes in and they just change everything overnight, and then boom, you got this mega church in about a year. Well, that happens, but I always just want to ask, well, what happened to the people that were there and had laid the foundation for this church? And I think sometimes when that happens, we take a core group of who's been in this church for 40 or 50 years and we just say, this church isn't for you anymore. Well, that's not good, and that's not healthy. I think the healthy thing to do is to slowly move a church in a new direction. I think there we see a difference in leadership and trickery. We don't want to trick, we want to lead. Here's another step you can do to help out your congregation that's always been singing out of the hymnal, is if you're wanting to sing a new worship song they've never heard before, then print out lead sheets or a hymn sheet for them to sing from and pass it out. Because a lot of people have grown up singing out of hymnals and don't really like singing words off the screen with no notes.
It's very frustrating.
It can be very frustrating. And so keep that in mind and provide that for a time. You may not want to provide that forever, but provide it long enough to help people get comfortable with newer music. Keep your current choir intact. And if you don't have a choir, start a choir. And that might not be what you expected to hear in this seminar. But if you want a congregation that's never sung contemporary music before to sing contemporary music, then don't just put yourself and another vocalist on stage leading them. You can, but if you really want to help them engage, then put a group of their peers on stage and let them lead the songs. We did that at Tallowood last year, and it's been I think one of the best decisions we've made is to start a worship choir for our contemporary service. We don't sing every week, we sing once a month. But once a month we put about 30 people on stage belting out these songs, and when we do, the room completely changes. The atmosphere, the participation, the environment changes, and it's nothing but good. And so I want to encourage you, and also this is a trend, okay? It's not just like something I thought of. This is a trend, but it's one of the best trends I've ever seen, is renewing choirs in worship in contemporary settings. So if you don't have a choir for your contemporary service, start one. Don't sing specials with them, just let them lead congregational singing. You can sing specials if you want, but you don't have to. Keep your orchestra or instrumental ensemble intact. Almost every contemporary worship song has orchestrations made for it, either at lifewayworship.com or praisecharts.com. Lifeway Worship is more accessible, but both are really good. And so don't just get rid of your orchestra if you have one. Even though they may frustrate you sometimes, it can still be helpful. And I'm going to say this with fear and trepidation, but be cautious how you use the organ with contemporary music. My mom's an organist, and she's accompanied me a lot as a worship leader. And it's not that the organ doesn't belong in modern music. It does. Almost every rock and roll song you hear has organ in it. Have you ever noticed? It just sounds like you're at the old ball game and not at the old cathedral. Okay, it's a little different, but the organ has a role to play. And if you're working with an organist who's been accompanying their church for 50 years, they're not just going to automatically know what you want. You need to help them learn what you want. And if they want to be involved in your contemporary worship service, then by all means, let them be involved, because your organist has been a presence in worship in your church for years. And so why not let them be a part of the leadership? Just let them know what you expect. I had an organist at my first church that I didn't really know how to relate to her or to tell her what I was really looking for. And so the whole time I served at that church, it was a constant struggle of me wishing she would do something different, her wishing I would do something different, but we never talked about it. And we could have had a much better relationship and a much better experience if I'd have just said, you know what? When we play these songs, why don't you do it this way? And then when we do the hymns, play the way you've always played. Just that simple conversation could have changed the whole experience for us. And I really wish I could rewind and do that situation again. Give your pianist and organist what they want, okay? Give them actual music. And I don't always follow this rule for myself, but I would say, especially in the beginning stages, give them real music, okay? Because they're going to get frustrated if you don't. Don't add drums right away unless you have a great drummer. And one of the reasons for that is you can't hide drums. Right? They're very exposed, they're loud, they're annoying, and people react to drums. And so if you're wanting to easily make a smooth transition, just start with acoustic guitar and an electric keyboard. Those are nice, pleasant things that don't rub people the wrong way, okay? So invest in great presentation software. As great as a program as PowerPoint is, it's not very helpful in worship anymore. And there's much better software that costs just as much as PowerPoint, like Easy Worship, Pro Presenter, Media Shout. It helps remove distractions. It helps you maneuver from slide to slide better. And then keep your technology within your church's means. If you're in a small church with a small budget, then you've really got to prioritize what you're going to purchase first and the things that you really need. And also you got to know what your volunteers are capable of doing and using. You don't want the sound console that Tallowood has upstairs if you've got a volunteer sound guy, because I don't know how to use the thing. It's big computer. Like, I don't even think it has anything manual on it. It's all digital. And I've never even I don't even know how to turn it on. Okay, and I've been running sound for years. So when you're looking at a sound system and technology, get stuff that volunteers can use. Get stuff that's user friendly. And that's not what this. There's another seminar on technology in your church. If that's something you really need help with, then there's definitely resources for you. But prioritize your technology. I think you need to start with word presentation, like this kind of stuff. You need to get that right first, because the most frustrating thing, I think, when we switch away from hymnals to using projection is people can't see it. At least that's the most common complaint I've gotten. So make sure that you invest in a good projector that can project clearly. Have good presentation software, and train your people running the words to stay ahead of you instead of being behind you. There's stuff like that. People need to be able to see the words you're asking them to sing. And then you do sound system. Okay, that's next. People need to be able to hear the music, and they need to be able to hear themselves. And if you have drums, get a drum shield when you get a sound system, because you need to control the volume. Then you can worry about lighting. That's next. And then video capability. A lot of times your media guys will get real excited about video capability, but it's last on the priority list because it's not what's happening in the room. It's for post-production or somewhere off-site. And video's kind of glamorous for media guys, but it's not helpful during the hour of worship. Yes?
I was going to say, I'm a drummer, so...
I'm sorry, good.
One of the things we've, because we're doing the transitioning, but one of the things we've found success is actually, if you do have a drummer, like for instance, our timpanist actually played drum set for their rock docs. He's a doctor, and he got together with other doctors to make a band. So he played drums, but to make the transition a little easier, we went to cajon.
Yeah.
And that cajon is a box that emulates drum set sounds, and it's very subtle.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And we've gotten a pretty good response with the older folks with that, especially even just on hymnal stuff. You can do same march styles in there.
Spell that word.
It's a CAJON.
Okay.
It's box in Spanish.
Mm-hmm. And it is. You're right. That's a great word. Cajones are very nice. They're not loud, but you can sound like a whole drum set with them with just two hands. Mm-hmm. And they're very nice. They're pleasant, and they're kind of like the new djembe. Djembe kind of does the same thing too. Cajones have the snare rattle in them, so it kind of gives it a little more cut. It cuts through a mix, and it's nice. All right, let's. So that is good. If you don't want to put a drum set in, put a cajon or some other kind of small percussion in. But cajones are nice because they give you, they give you the full beat.
Right.
So real quickly, we'll talk about song selection. And I think this may be the most important part of all of it, because the songs we choose are really important. I was in a workshop with Jenny Lee Riddle. She's the lady that wrote Revelation Song. And she said that when worship leaders choose songs for worship on Sunday, they're putting words into the mouth of the bride of Christ that she will say back to him. And when she said that, my stress level went through the roof. I was like, my job just got so much more difficult. But I've never forgotten when she said that and how important this is for us. And so it makes each one of these things really important, that we know our congregation's heart and voice. You know better than any other worship leader what your congregation needs to sing, because that's where God's placed you, and they're the people that you minister to on a weekly basis. Familiarity is more important than being thematic. And if you're choosing songs that are theologically sound, then you can't go wrong, right? And so if you have to choose between a song they've never heard but it fits the sermon perfectly, or a song that they're really going to sing on, then choose a song they're really going to sing on. I just think it's more important. Now Aaron will say, well, Joel, you never do that. Well, that's me telling you what you need to do. So choose songs that help you avoid the 7-Eleven joke. The most popular critique of guys like me. Y'all know what that joke is?
Yes.
A
7
song
words.
that I would say.
I was just saying it's 7 words that you sing like 11 times.
Right.
I could sing of your love forever.
That's perfect. 7 words. You can say it 11 times. Say it. Yeah. So it's. And I will say though, it's okay to use songs that have a few words because the angels around the throne don't sing that many words when they say holy, 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 right? So it's okay.
And
Just
the whole Tazay,
Tazay, yeah.
Is repetition.
Right. Repetition's not bad. You just don't want to like drive people crazy with it, is the thing. And you'll get the joke anyway. But
It's not a joke.
but just let it roll off your back and don't worry about it. Because you know that you have songs that you can choose with a lot of depth. And lots of words don't equal lots of depth either. Right? Just that's good to keep in mind. Keep your song selection and rotation small because you want your people to be able to know the songs you're doing. And you can move new music into your rotation, but I would say a good rule of thumb is no more than 1 new song a month. At least that works for me. You want to avoid songs that require virtuoso skill to perform. This is the second most popular critique. And this is about vocals. So you don't want to sing songs that are difficult for your congregation to sing. Leave out ad-lib and ooh, ah, la, la, la lines as a worship leader. One of my favorite songs is by David Crowder, and it's called Oh Praise Him, but there's a whole section where he just goes la, 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 la. Okay, well that's in the recording. I never do that when I lead the song live. No one needs to just sing la, la, la in the congregation, usually. Leave out instrumental parts of songs. People are more likely to complain about your guitar player's guitar solo than the organ prelude. People will sit back and listen to an organ prelude and love it. They'll hate the guitar solo. Nothing wrong with guitar solos, but it's just the way it is. Just consider leaving those parts out of worship songs. Listen to your Christian radio station for frequently played worship songs. Now you're playing with fire there. Then here's why I say this though. Because for all the bad stuff you might hear on that radio station, they're going to play some good ones too on a regular basis. The reason I say listen to it and consider using 1 or 2 is because the likelihood of your congregation listening to that radio station is pretty high. Even if they don't like singing those songs in worship, maybe. They might still listen to that radio station. And they'll probably hear these songs. And then, when you're able to sing it in worship, you don't have to teach it to them. They might already know it. One great example is this song right here, 10,000 Reasons. It was played on the radio a lot. And it is a great song. There's nothing wrong with this song. It's, what I mean is, like, I haven't found anything about this song that's not good except for one really long instrumental section. But just cut it out. Choose songs that have a hymn-like feel if you're trying to get people to acclimate to a new worship style. Like 10,000 Reasons, Stronger and Cornerstone are both by Hillsong. They both basically are hymns. Lord, I Need You. I think they did that in worship yesterday, right? These are songs that sound and feel like hymns, and people will respond to them. And choose songs that make non-controversial theological statements. And I say that you don't, it's not that you can't ever make controversial theological statements and cause people to question and think, but in the early stages, just say things that everybody agrees on, like the Lordship of Jesus Christ. Okay?
Yes, always.
All right. Well, that's all we have, and I know we're a few minutes over. Thank you all for being here, and